Jim Jones says he's bigger than Nas. Wait, what? A man who once idolized Nas is now calling himself more influential than the legend himself. And guess who's lurking in the shadows? Jay-Z. While Jones talks wild on podcasts, 50 Cent is calling BS, and he's not holding back. According to Fif, Jim isn't just reaching, he's being used, manipulated, played like a pawn in a game only one man knows how to win. So what's the truth behind the chaos? Is this just another cloud-chasing moment? Or is there a strategic power play unfolding in hip-hop's underworld? Buckle up, because this story goes deep. And it's messy. Asterisk, it all started on Fat Joe and Jadakiss's podcast, a chill setup, some nostalgic hip-hop talk, and then boom. Jim Jones drops a bomb. He says he's better than Nas and has done more for the culture than Nas ever could. Seriously, let that sink in for a second. Asterisk now. Hip-hop debates are nothing new. Everyone wants to be the greatest, but Jim's take, it wasn't just bold, it was flat-out delusional to some. He even doubled down, saying today's generation doesn't know Nas, but they know him. Jim claimed his style, his influence, even his swag-shaped modern rap more than Nas ever did. Asterisk, now keep in mind, this is the same Jim Jones who once said Nas was his idol, who used to praise his lyricism, his style, even the way he dressed. But now, Jim's saying he ran laps around him in impact and relevance. And the room felt that shift. Jadakiss, stone-faced, Fat Joe, quiet. The vibe was off. Everyone knew it. Asterisk, was this just ego? Or was someone pulling the strings behind the scenes? Enter 50 Cent. 50 took one look at Jim's statements and fired back. Were you smoking when you said that? The disbelief in his voice wasn't even anger, it was mockery. The kind of mockery you reserve for someone who's lost all sense of self-awareness. Asterisk 2. 50. This wasn't just about rap skills, it was about loyalty. About respect. About remembering where you came from and who paved the road you're walking on. He pointed out that Jim Jones is the same guy who once dreamed of meeting Nas, who built his career during a time when Nas was the gold standard. Asterisk, but now, Jones was calling himself more relevant, more impactful, and throwing Billboard stats around like they meant everything. That's when 50 started connecting the dots. Jim's sudden disrespect toward Nas just happened to come right after rekindling ties with Jay-Z. Asterisk coincidence. 50 doesn't think so. In his own words, a boss keeps their hands clean, even when they do dirt. And Jay-Z, he's the cleanest dirty player in the game. Asterisk, according to 50, Jim is just Jay's new pawn, set loose to stir drama with Nas while Jay watches from the shadows. After all, the tension between Jay-Z and Nas isn't new. Remember Ether? Their beef shook the culture. So for someone like Jay, who carefully curates his image, using Jim to poke the bear makes perfect sense. Asterisk C. 50's been in this position before. Back in the mid-2000s, Jim tried to cross into G-Unit territory. At the height of Dipset's beef with G-Unit, Jim shockingly appeared at a G-Unit event, trying to cozy up to 50, but 50 saw right through it. Asterisk 250. Jim's not loyal. He's not real. He's just opportunistic, jumping from one alliance to another whenever the heat or clout is right. And that's the real problem here. 50's loyalty lies with those who never switched up, people like Eminem, people who fought for him. When Jay tried to block 50 from the Super Bowl performance, guess who stood up and said no? 50. No, Eminem. That's why 50 rides for him, and why he'll never respect people like Jim Jones or Jay-Z. Once Jim Jones realized he was facing backlash for disrespecting ASS, he did what every clout-hungry rapper does in 2025. He pulled out the stats. Asterisk, Jim tried to flip the conversation from culture to charts. He claimed that he had the numbers, the streaming stats, the viral moments, that his Billboard entries were proof that he was more relevant now than Nas has ever been. Bold, definitely, but accurate, not even close. Asterisk, Jim Jones, 9 Billboard 200 entries, 3 top 10 albums, 0 number ones. Nas, 27 Billboard 200 entries, 16 top 10 albums, 6 number 1 albums. Asterisk, that's not just a difference, that's a chasm. A canyon, a Grand Canyon-wide gap in legacy, respect, and cultural impact. And yet, Jim kept pushing the narrative that his music hits harder today. But what's a TikTok trend compared to decades of timeless music? Asterisk, let's get real. You can go viral overnight for the wrong reasons, but you don't land in the Hall of Fame unless you built something real. something that shaped the culture. And Nas, he reshaped it. From storytelling to street poetry, from rhyme cadence to social commentary, he carved a lane rappers still travel today. Jim's biggest track, Bailin', a certified hit, no doubt, but ask yourself, can you name 5 more? Can you recite a bar that moved the culture? That changed the game. What Jim doesn't get, or refuses to admit, is that hip-hop greatness isn't measured in monthly Spotify plays. It's in timeless influence. Nas was the blueprint for Jay, for Big, for every crack rap artist who came after. He didn't just rap about the game, he narrated it, authored it, gave it soul, and that's what Jim's missing. He's out here comparing algorithms while Nas has people studying his lyrics in college classrooms. You don't need a viral moment when you are the moment, and Nas, he's been that for over 30 years. Even Fat Joe and Jada knew it. The room shifted the second Jim started talking wild. Nobody challenged him, not because they agreed, but because the disrespect didn't deserve dignifying. This isn't about one hot record or who's trending on Instagram. It's about the weight of legacy. And in that arena, Jim's playing in a sandbox, while Nas is carving his name in stone. Jim Jones has never just been a rapper, he's been a survivor, a hustler, a man who learned early on that in this industry, loyalty is optional, and alliances are currency. But that mindset, while effective in the short term, has earned him a reputation that no amount of Billboard entries can erase. Let's go back. Way back to the early 2000s. At that time, Dipset was becoming a movement. Cameron Juelz, Santana, and Jim Jones were the faces of Harlem swagger. They weren't just rappers, they were a lifestyle. Pink furs, bandanas, oversized chains. They brought the streets to the mainstream. But even within that tight circle, cracks were forming. Jim, originally the hype man and director behind Cameron's early videos, slowly positioned himself as more than just a background figure. He wanted more clout, more power, more shine. And he wasn't going to let loyalty to anyone stop him. It started when Cameron began clashing with Jay-Z. Cam felt Jay was trying to shut him out of the Rockefeller hierarchy. Cam had been promised a vice president role at Rockefeller by Dame Dash. When Jay took over, that promise vanished. Cam went public. He called Jay fake, disrespectful, said he wore flip-flops in the winter, and accused him of blocking Harlem out of the label they helped build. Jim was right there with Cam, at least. At first, the streets remember Jim going hard on Jay, in interviews, on wax, even in person. In 2008, Jim physically assaulted one of Jay-Z's close business associates at a Manhattan Louis Vuitton store. It was brutal, it was public, it made headlines, and it showed the world just how deep Jim's hatred for Jay supposedly ran. But that hatred came with an expiration date. Fast forward a few years later, and the same Jim Jones who once mocked Jay and called him soft, was walking into ROC Nation offices with his hat in hand. What changed? Well, Dipset had cooled off. The music wasn't charting like it used to. Cam had taken a step back. Juelz was battling personal demons. And Jim, he was chasing relevancy. Jay had what Jim wanted: connections, branding power, industry leverage. So Jim did what many would never do. He went back on everything he said, every diss he recorded, every punch he threw, and signed under the same man he once called his enemy. To the public, it looked desperate. To people like 50 Cent, it looked weak. See, 50 has always played the game differently. He's had his feuds, sure, with Ja Rule, with the game, with Jay. But what's set 50 apart is consistency. He's never switched up. He's never apologized for beefing. He never crawled back to the same people he tried to destroy. If 50 burned a bridge, it stayed burned. Jim, on the other hand, seems to keep a lighter and a toolkit. He'll blow the bridge up, then rebuild it when it benefits him. This wasn't the first time either. Let's talk about G-Unit. In 2007, Dipset and G-Unit were beefing heavy. Cam and 50 were trading shots. It was ugly. But right in the middle of that, Jim Jones suddenly shows up at a G-Unit event, on stage, with 50, shouting out Ballin like he's part of the crew. What was the move? Some said 50 was trolling Cam. Others believed Jim thought he could get signed. Maybe he was trying to use the G-Unit platform to launch his solo career. Whatever it was, the stunt backfired. 50 saw through it. He never had plans to sign Jim. He brought him on stage to expose him, to show Cam and the world that Jim wasn't loyal to anyone. Not his team, not his friends, not even his word. And that's the pattern. When it suits Jim, he's Dipset for life. When the buzz fades, he's shouting out ROC Nation. When the backlash hits, he's suddenly the victim. It's not just betrayal, it's betrayal without accountability. Even now, with this Nas situation, the flip-flop is obvious. Jim spent years praising Nas, calling him an icon, an influence, saying he studied Nas's style, his wordplay, his swagger. But when one young fan compared Jim to Nas, even jokingly, Jim didn't clarify. He didn't say, "Nah, Nas is a legend, don't get it twisted." He leaned into it, amplified it, claimed he was better, more influential, more relevant. Why? Because disrespect moves numbers, because controversy makes headlines, and because Jim knows the game better than most. Drama sells. But selling out your legacy, selling out your word, that's not a win. That's desperation disguised as ambition. Even Fat Joe and Jadakiss looked uncomfortable during that podcast moment, not because they were scared to call Jim out, but because they knew it wasn't worth it. Jim was trying to go viral, not tell the truth. And let's be real. If there's one thing that defines this new generation of rap beefs, it's the death of real loyalty. It's not about riding for your crew anymore. It's about riding the algorithm. Jim is a perfect example. Look at how he speaks about his Dipset brothers today. It's love when convenient, silence when not. There was a time when Dipset stood for something. Unity, Harlem pride. But that image shattered the moment Jim started picking deals over day ones. And this brings us full circle. Why 50 Cent has never respected Jim Jones. 250. Loyalty isn't optional. It's the currency of real men. And when you flip sides, every time the tide changes, you're not a boss, you're a puppet, a tool, a middleman in someone else's plan. Jim might say he's still in the game, rapping at a high level, that he's still relevant. But relevance doesn't erase receipts. And the receipts say this: Jim Jones has betrayed everyone he's ever stood beside. Cameron Nas 50. Even the fans who once believed in his authenticity, and that's why, no matter how many podcasts he appears on, no matter how many Billboard numbers he throws out, he'll never have what Nas has. Respect. Because respect isn't given when you're trending. Respect is earned when you're silent. Respect is kept when you're loyal. And Jim, he's never been that. There's a reason people call Jay-Z a genius, not just in music, but in manipulation. He's the quiet operator. The one who never makes a scene but always controls the room. And according to 50 Cent, he's been pulling strings behind the scenes for years, especially when it comes to Nas. Let's be clear. Jay-Z has always wanted to win, not just artistically but politically. He's not the kind of guy to throw a punch in public, that's too obvious. No, Jay moves like a chess player. He lets other people take the fall while he calculates the next 5 moves. And that's exactly what 50 believes is happening now. Through Jim Jones. Jim didn't just wake up one day and decide to diss Nas. That doesn't make sense. Especially when you consider their history. Jim grew up admiring Nas, even crediting him as one of his biggest influences. So why the sudden disrespect? Why the public shots? Why now? Because Jay-Z benefits from it. Let's rewind. The Jay-Z vs Nas beef in the early 2000s was legendary. Ether shook the game. Takeover was calculated, brutal. The battle was personal, lyrical, and raw. And when the dust settled, Nas had earned something you can't buy. Legacy. Jay's image. It took a hit. Even after they publicly squashed the beef, the rivalry never really ended. The tension just went underground. Jay started building empires. ROC Nation. Title. Partnerships with the NFL. And while he was collecting Grammys and breaking corporate ceilings, Nas was collecting respect in the streets, and that's where Jay struggled. Because no matter how polished he became, there was one thing Nas always had over him: authenticity. Nas was the poet, the prophet, the people's champ. Jay was the mogul, the businessman, the strategist. So what does a strategist do when he can't beat you directly? He moves through others. This is where Jim Jones enters the board, by bringing Jim under ROC Nation's umbrella. Jay did more than just offer him a deal. He offered him visibility, industry protection, a second wind in a career that had long cooled off. And in return, all Jim had to do was follow the script. Start beef, make noise, shift the conversation, stir the pot with Nas, just enough to spark controversy, but not enough to make it obvious that Jay was involved. Classic misdirection. And the timing. Suspiciously perfect, right when Nas is enjoying a critical resurgence, dropping King's disease with Hit Boy, earning Grammy wins, and reminding the world that legends don't fade. Here comes Jim, tossing shade. Coincidence? Doubtful. 50 Cent sees through this. He's lived through it. He's said it before. Every time he dropped an album, Jay would release something on the same day. Every move 50 made, Jay responded with strategic silence or corporate plays. And when Jay didn't want to get his hands dirty, someone else stepped in. Beanie Sigel, True Life. Now, Jim Jones. Because that's how Jay operates. When Jadakiss came for him, Beanie took the shots. When Cameron dissed him, True Life came out swinging. Jay-Z doesn't need to respond, he outsources the smoke. And that's the brilliance, and the problem. See, Jay-Z built an empire by mastering perception. He rarely loses in the court of public opinion. He looks like the mature one, the visionary, the untouchable CEO. But behind the curtain, he's making ruthless moves, silently, efficiently, and often, without accountability. Even Jay's praise comes with strategy. When he gave Nas props and success, it was subtle, controlled, a move to appear gracious, not an admission of defeat. Because if Jay ever gives Nas full credit, it breaks the illusion that he's the king of New York, and that illusion is everything. So when Jim starts firing shots at Nas, you have to ask, who benefits? Not Jim. The backlash has been relentless, but Jay, he gets exactly what he wants. Nas pulled back into old drama. Fans distracted. Legacy debates reignited. And Jay, untouched. It's the oldest trick in the book. Divide and conquer. Create noise below so no one hears the footsteps above. Jay-Z has always been about legacy, but not just his legacy. About rewriting everyone else's to fit the version that serves him. And in that version, Nas was never the real threat. He was the challenger who got lucky. The underdog who had a moment. But that's the lie. Because deep down, Jay knows the truth. That Nas didn't just beat him in a battle, he won the people's trust. The love that can't be bought. The authenticity that never fades. And that's why Jay keeps moving pieces. That's why he uses voices like Jim's. Because the more he tries to control the narrative, the more obvious it becomes. That he's never truly let it go. And 50, he's calling it like he sees it. Because when you've played in the mud and survived the game, you know exactly what a clean suit is hiding. In an industry filled with betrayals, strategic backstabs, and opportunistic alliances, 50 Cent has managed to do something very few artists have: maintain a consistent code. No matter who he's beefed with, no matter how loud or brutal the shots have been, there's one word you'll hear from his camp over and over again: loyalty. And the person who embodies that loyalty best, Eminem. The bond between 50 Cent and Eminem isn't just one of label mates or business partners, it's brotherhood. It's built on risk, trust, and loyalty that never wavered, even when the stakes were at their highest. Eminem was the first industry heavyweight to bet on 50 when nobody else would. He saw a kid from Queens with scars, war stories, and something nobody could teach: raw presence. And he put his name on the line for him. Think about what that meant. At the time, 50 was radioactive. He'd just survived 9 bullets. He was blackballed by multiple labels. He had beef with half of New York. But M didn't flinch. He didn't wait to see which way the wind was blowing. He heard the music, saw the potential, and moved. That kind of loyalty. It built G-Unit, it created classics. It set the foundation for one of the most dominant runs in hip-hop history. And 50 never forgot that, even as he transitioned from mixtape monster to mogul. From bulletproof vests to book tours, he's never disrespected M. Never switched sides. Never chased a trend. He knows where he came from, and he knows who showed up when it mattered. That's why when the NFL was putting together the Super Bowl halftime show, and 50's name was suspiciously absent from the early announcements, guess who made the call? Eminem. And not just a casual request. M went to Jay-Z. Yes, that Jay-Z and said, "Number 50, know me." In other words, I don't care how big the stage is. If you're cutting out the people who stood by me, I'm out. That's real. Jay could have used his executive power to sideline 50, could have buried the invite, pretended it was the NFL's decision. But M forced his hand. Because that's what loyalty does. It breaks the politics. It disrupts the plan. It demands respect. And you better believe, 50 noticed. He didn't go on a PR tour. He didn't flood Instagram with thank you posts. But in every interview, every podcast appearance, He made one thing crystal clear. He rides with M till the wheels fall off. Why? Because M didn't just co-sign him, he protected him. He never tried to change 50. Never told him to tone it down or be more marketable. He let him be 50. Raw, unfiltered, dangerous. And that kind of freedom is rare in this industry. Contrast that with what we've seen from guys like Jim Jones. Jim shifts with the wind. One minute he's Harlem till he dies. The next, he's praising the same man he once dissed on live radio. One day, it's all about Dipset loyalty. The next, he's pulling strings with ROC Nation. That's the difference. 50 never begged for a spot. He never had to bend the knee to stay relevant. He built his own empire: movies, books, liquor brands, television shows. And through it all, his reputation remained the same. Ruthless, sure. Petty, definitely. But loyal. Always, and that loyalty pays off. When people talk about 50, they might laugh at his trolling. They might debate his music. But no one questions his authenticity. No one wonders if he's playing both sides. You know exactly where he stands. And that kind of consistency, that's why he's still standing. Meanwhile, guys like Jim are chasing moments, trying to stay hot, trying to stay viral. But what happens when the algorithm stops spinning? When the labels move on? When the podcasts aren't calling? They fade. Because attention fades. But respect, real respect, lasts. That's why 50 keeps winning. Not because he's the most lyrical. Not because he's the most streamed. But because he means what he says. Because people know that when 50 shows up for you, it's not fake. It's not performative. It's personal. And that kind of energy, it's rare. It's powerful. It's what separates legends from temporary trends. Eminem knew it. And that's why he protected 50 like a brother. Even when it meant confronting one of the biggest names in the game. Jay-Z might run the boardrooms, but 50 runs the streets. And in hip-hop, where perception is power, the streets still matter. Strip away the headlines, mute the podcasts, ignore the viral clips, the Billboard charts, the spicy soundbites, and the social media noise. When the dust settles, only one name in this entire mess stands tall. Untouched by clout-chasing drama. Nas, because Nas doesn't need to fight for relevance. He is relevance. See, what Jim Jones fails to understand, and what 50 Cent knows too well, is that in hip-hop, there's a line between trending and timeless. You can go viral overnight. You can drop hits that light up TikTok, but timeless. Timeless is earned. It's built over decades. It's carved into culture, and Nas, he's in the granite. This isn't about sales. It's not even about who had more chart toppers. This is about who shaped the sound, the thought, the heart of an entire genre. It's about who rappers reference when they talk about why they started rapping. It's about who built the language and emotion of hip-hop from the inside out. And that man is Nasir Jones, from Illmatic, a record that literally changed the way people judged hip-hop albums. 2. It was written. 2. Stillmatic. Nas has always spoken from a place deeper than the studio. He wasn't chasing bangers, he was documenting survival, struggle, spiritual battles, social wounds, inner-city nightmares turned into poetry. He was the one who gave voice to the voiceless. Not by flexing riches, but by expressing pain. Not by stunting in clubs, but by breaking down systemic cycles. And while others were chasing hooks and hooks and hooks, Nas was busy building scripture. That's why, when Jim Jones compares himself to Nas, it feels off. Not because Jim didn't contribute to the culture. Dipset had their era, their moment, their movement. But moments are not legacies, they're snapshots. Nas is the whole mural, and it shows. Not just in music, but in the respect that follows him everywhere he goes. He walks into any room in hip-hop and he's met with reverence. Not just from peers, but from fans across generations. From KRS-One to Kendrick Lamar. From Rakim to J. Cole. They all name-check Nas, not out of obligation, but out of admiration. Even his critics respect him. And that's the thing, Nas doesn't get caught in this drama. He's not showing up on podcasts calling people out. He's not firing back on Instagram. He's not playing the numbers game. Because when you've been a god, you don't argue with mortals. That's why his Grammy win for King's Disease meant so much. Not because Nas needed a trophy, but because the industry finally caught up. They finally admitted what the streets have known since '94, that Nas was never just rapping. He was leading, and now, in his 40s, Nas is doing something rare. He's aging with grace. Evolving his sound. Making albums that don't just exist, they matter. Magic, King's Disease, his work with Hit Boy. This isn't nostalgia. It's reinvention. He's doing the impossible, staying relevant without selling his soul. Meanwhile, Jim is still trying to convince people he's more relevant than Nas ever was, and maybe in a few circles, maybe among certain fans raised on clout and charts, he might win that argument. But history won't write it that way. Because history isn't kind to loudness. It's kind to greatness. Nas didn't need a podcast moment. He had ether. He didn't need to beg for respect. He earned it every time he rhymed about the projects, the prisons, the profits, and the pain. He didn't need Jay-Z's cosign or EMS shoutout, or 50's stamp of approval. He needed a mic, a pen, and his truth. And that truth outlasts everything. So, when people ask, why is everyone defending Nas? The answer is simple. Because Nas defended us. He put our lives in rhyme. He elevated our pain into poetry. He gave us something to believe in, when nobody else would. And no Billboard stat can compare to that. No viral clip can erase that. No rapper, not even one with a ROC Nation stamp, can touch that. Because Nas doesn't chase the culture. He is the culture. Asterisk, this isn't just a story about rap beef. It's not even just about Nas, 50 Cent, or Jim Jones. It's about legacy, loyalty, and how, in the ever-evolving world of hip-hop, the real ones always rise above the noise. Because when all is said and done, the people don't remember who went viral, they remember who went real. Jim Jones can rant on podcasts, throw stats into the air like confetti, and yell into microphones about how today's youth don't even know who Nas is. But that says more about today's youth than it does about Nas, and it says a lot more about Jim Jones. There's a certain desperation that comes when a man is faced with irrelevance, when the spotlight starts to dim, when the streams start to slow, and you can either accept your place, gracefully, or you can claw for a spotlight that no longer belongs to you. Jim chose the latter. He chose to throw shots at someone who paved the road he walks on, someone who inspired his fashion, his delivery, his whole approach to the game. Someone who wrote Illmatic while Jim was still trying to figure out who he wanted to be. And that's what makes this so tragic. Not the disrespect, but the delusion. Because Jim knows, deep down, he knows who Nas is. He knows what Nas represents. And still, he chose to chase a headline instead of honor. That's what 50 Cent saw. That's why he stepped in. Not because he and Nas are best friends. Not because he needed the clout, but because he understood what was really happening. 50's been in the trenches. He's been shot, blackballed, silenced, doubted. But through it all, he never turned into what Jim has. He never begged for a seat at a table that didn't respect him. He built his own, and more importantly, he remembered who fed him first. Eminem gave him a shot. 50 never forgot. Jay-Z tried to bury him. 50 never forgave. That's the code. A code Jim broke a long time ago, when he betrayed Cameron, when he ran to 50. Then ran back to Jay. When he dissed Nas, the man he once idolized, just to get people talking. Jim is a survivor, yes, but sometimes surviving means becoming something you once hated. And that's the cost of clout. Jay-Z, he's not innocent in this either. If 50's right, and the patterns sure suggest he is, then Jay hasn't let the Nas beef go. He's just learned how to outsource the aggression. He lets guys like Jim swing wild while he polishes his image in boardrooms. It's strategic. It's brilliant. It's also cowardly. Real power doesn't need puppets. It stands on its own. And then, there's Nas the calm, in the storm. The man who doesn't need to respond. Because when your catalog speaks louder than your critics, silence becomes your strongest diss. Nas doesn't have to prove anything. Not to Jim, not to Jay, not even to the culture. He is the culture. He's what people study when they study lyricism. He's what young MCs reference when they're trying to understand authenticity. He's what real fans hold on to when the game feels fake. That's what legacy looks like. It's not in the streams. It's in the respect. It's not in the headlines. It's in the hearts of the people who lived through your music. And that's why, 20 years from now, no one will be debating Jim Jones versus Nas. They'll be studying Nas's verses, quoting one mic, playing "The World Is Yours" to their kids. And Jim will still be on someone's podcast, trying to convince the world that he mattered more than the numbers say he did. But here's the truth. Real ones don't need to convince anybody. Their work speaks. Their name carries weight. Their silence is louder than your screams. And that's the difference. So while Jim plays checkers in public, Nas is writing timeless scripture in private. While Jay plays chess behind the scenes, 50 keeps walking through the front door, loud, unfiltered, but real, and in the end, real wins, real survives the trends, real builds empires, real becomes immortal. So let them talk. Let them argue over Billboard charts and podcast clips. And who had the hottest verse? Because when it's all said and done, the streets remember. The culture remembers. The legends remember. The real ones remember.